So first, just short introduction in Czech language. Dobrý den, dámy a pánové, vítáme vás u speciálního videa, které vzniklo tak trochu díky pomoci filmového festivalu Akademia Film Olomouc z 56. ročníku, který se odehrává i v tuhletu chvíli online, což je festival v podstatě vědeckých filmů. Všechny linky, které se ho týkají, najdete dole v popisku. A dneska tady máme hosta Richarda Heinberga, kterého pak můžete najít jako jednoho z přednášejících, takže rozhodně mrkněte na linky v popisku, je tam dokonce i stránka, kde najdete spoustu těch filmů, které se tam budou odehrávat, nebo tam budou vysílány, budou prostě dostupný později online. A my už se teď vrhneme do angličtiny, doufám, že jsem to stihl všechno. So let's jump right into English. And so for a short introduction, I hope I'm gonna say it correctly. So our guest today is Richard Heinberg, who is an American journalist, educator, and author, whose main field of interest would be climate change and what to do about it. I hope I summarized it right. Is it correct?
Yeah, my field is a little broader than climate change. I'd say climate and energy, but
okay, I might. Maybe I'll start with the. Maybe I'll start with the. Sorry.
There's a slight delay, so
yeah, and maybe I'll start with the first question then.
Sure.
Okay, so I've watched several videos on YouTube when you were talking, like for example, on TEDx, and that's like most of these videos were from 7 years ago, and most of what you have said was about the depletion of resources, how it will be difficult to get more resources in the future, about energy. And my question now is, so were your predictions kind of doom and gloom, or is it better now? Are your predictions better now, or is it actually worse?
Well, I don't know about better or worse. There were some things that I missed when I was looking at the energy situation a few years ago. I didn't foresee that the US would produce so much oil and natural gas from fracking. The geologists typically call this shale gas and tight oil. And I won't bore you with the details of how this is different from conventional oil and gas, but it is different. It's a different category of resource, has different characteristics, and it's produced very differently. The effort that's required is much greater than with conventional oil, which means the higher rates of investment are required and so on. So the US really did an amazing about face over the last, say, 12 years with this new technology, new means of extracting oil and natural gas. Previously, the US had been seeing declining rates of oil production, and natural gas was starting to look kind of iffy. And over 10 years, the US became once again in many months, the world's top producer of oil. And that's really saying something. I mean, it was an amazing feat. How long can America continue doing this? Probably not much longer. My organization has done a lot of technical research on the prospects for fracking as time goes on. And it's very clear this is a short-term boom that we have seen, and it can't be maintained for more than another few years at the most. And the reason is that these oil fields deplete very rapidly. And that's why the rates of drilling are so high in Texas and Oklahoma and North Dakota and places like that. They have to drill and drill and drill in order just to keep production rates steady. Because each well declines very rapidly. The rate of production from each well after the first year just drops off very, very quickly. So the short answer is things didn't turn out to be quite as dire as I was saying 10 years ago in terms of future world oil supply. But, you know, what have we done in that 10 years? We have depleted this new resource base that we didn't know was there. And it's not at all clear that there will be another rabbit to pull out of the hat, you know, and our set of magic tricks is kind of limited, and we've probably just seen the last of them. So where do we go from here? World energy supplies are limited. Right now, 85% of our energy comes from fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. All of those are non-renewable, depleting resources. And what do we have to replace them with? Nuclear, wind, solar, those are the main ones. There are a few smaller options off to the side, like hydro is a considerable energy source in some places, but it's limited in terms of how much more we could develop it. And geothermal, kind of the same thing, ocean wave power. Fusion energy is always touted as the energy source of the future, and it may always be the energy source of the future. We may never actually get there, we don't know. But all of these alternatives to fossil fuels have problems of one kind or another that's going to prevent them from being able to deliver the level of benefits, economic benefits to society that we have seen from fossil fuels over the past century or so. That doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but it does mean that we should be planning not just for a switch away from fossil fuels to alternative energy sources, but also a switch to a different kind of economy, an economy that's not constantly growing at 3% per year or something, but one that may in fact be shrinking at least for a while. Our energy is everything. You know, everything that we do requires energy. And energy transitions are transformational for societies and their economies. So as we reach the end of the fossil fuel age, this is not just a technical problem. This is a transformational moment for all of human history.
It was actually one of the things that you mentioned in the video, like from 2011, and it was kind of scary to me because you were basically predicting that when there will be the problem with the resources and lowered economical growth, it will be like one side of a political spectrum will blame the other for not being able to achieve the economical growth. Then the other side will be voted in, and then it will be blamed by the other, and it's like a never-ending political discussion that will just like won't be able to achieve any of these promises. So is that like more prophetical? I would say even that it was like in 2011, and I said like that's interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's where we're headed, and the only way we're going to get through this without some pretty terrible events along the way is if everyone understands the nature of the challenge ahead of us. It's sort of like with the coronavirus pandemic. You know, if everyone understands that we have this public health crisis and everyone has to pitch in by, wearing a face mask and getting vaccinated and so on, then hopefully we can get through this in a relatively short amount of time. It'll be, difficult. Some people lose their jobs. There's some suffering entailed, and of course, some people die from the disease. And it's not a good picture, but at least we can get through it. But if we don't have that level of social cohesion and cooperation, then it's much worse if you have half the people saying, well, what disease? This is a fake disease that's been made up by these corrupt political leaders, and we shouldn't be wearing face masks because it inhibits our personal freedom. And the vaccines were created by these evil pharmaceutical companies who were just trying to inject microchips into our arms. then if we go that route, if half the people are believing in these fairy tales, then we'll never get through the pandemic. The same thing with climate change and the energy transition. If we don't understand that sacrifices will be required, if we don't understand that climate change is a really big deal, and if we don't do anything about it, then the result will be, not only economic chaos, but ecological chaos for future generations. Then we're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, since the understanding of societies is obviously crucial for our action, let's say, or effective transformation away from this problem, and the discussion around climate change and going away from fossil fuels and so on is going on for tens of years, let's say, at least. To which point are we right now? Is the discussion getting more and more understandable, or is the situation are people more divided or less? How do you see it in your point of view?
I think it's probably different by nation. So some nations are more unified, are taking more responsible steps, but nations are in a different starting place too. Some nations use huge amounts of energy. The U.S., for example, uses twice the amount of energy on a per capita basis as people in Western Europe. And the quality of life is not significantly different. We have just created an energy infrastructure that requires ongoing high rates of energy usage. So it's going to be more difficult for the United States to make the energy transition than it will be for many countries in Western Europe. Then compare that with sub-Saharan Africa or South America. Every country is going to have a different path ahead of it. So it's important that not only that people within countries be unified around the idea of making sacrifices and moving forward together, but it's also important that the world as a whole be unified. Rich countries, poor countries, industrialized countries, less industrialized countries, countries that have lots of geothermal energy like Iceland, or that have lots of hydropower like Costa Rica. Oh, they're sitting pretty. They can make the energy transition much more easily than countries that have very few renewable energy resources, comparatively speaking. So, we're all going to have to pitch in and help each other. Right now, I don't see much of that happening. So it's, it's, as you say, we've known about this for a long time, and many of the issues have been clear, at least to the experts, but most people still have a very, very hazy, fuzzy understanding of the level of effort and sacrifice that are going to be required, and those who do have a difficult time talking about this with their neighbors who just don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, there is a problem that the whole thing is seen very political, and it's kind of difficult not to see it political in the same way. Right. Because like when I was listening to you in all of these videos and these like talks that you were giving, it sounded to me like I tried to look at it from the perspective of the opposition, how they see it. And it's like when you see it that way, you can see it as a giant conspiracy. Like these people were not able to get their political beliefs into our heads through the normal political actions. So they are using the scarecrow of like global climate change to basically push their political agenda. As you were saying, like, for example, the global domestic happiness index or stuff like that. So of course it's seen like just, some kind of political statement more than actually effort to like make our planet better. How can you fight this perspective?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, I think it would be helpful if the news media could do a better job of educating the populations about just the science, not only of climate change itself, which should be, on the at the top of every, news report and in every magazine. It should be in front of our eyes all the time, just as if we were in a war like World War II. It's everybody was talking about it all the time because their loved ones were in uniform and fighting. They knew people who were getting killed and slaughtered. It was you couldn't even if it was something you hated to hear about, you knew that you had to pay attention to it because your survival depended on it. Well, our survival depends on doing these things with regard to climate change, making the energy transition. So it needs to be in front of our faces all the time. And then people need to be assisted in understanding the energy issues. And the state of energy literacy in most countries is very, very low. I mean, most people know that we have fossil fuels and there are alternative energy sources out there, and somehow we have to make the switch. But, what are the characteristics of those alternative energy sources? What do we use energy for? How do we use it? For most people, these subjects are, leave it to the experts. I don't want to hear about it. There are too many numbers involved, maybe even equations, heaven forbid, please, don't bother me with that.
Also, don't listen to the experts because they are just, political and the experts are just lying.
Yeah,
yeah.
Right.
So maybe with the comparison with the war, maybe there's a problem that when you're in war, you have quite a clear opponent and things are pretty simple. But what I see in the debates around climate change and it's solving the problem is that maybe there's not let's say, there is a unified goal, but not a unified means how to achieve it. So
right.
Maybe many of the discussions are around, I don't know, at which year should we go carbon neutral? Is it 2025, 2030, 2050? How do we do it? Do we just abandon all fossil fuels? Do we use just clean power, coal power plants? Do we use nuclear energy or not? There are quite heated discussions. So maybe what is your, for example, view on nuclear energy at this debate?
Mm-hmm.
Quite heated.
Well, my organization has come to the view after looking at the data, the evidence, that nuclear power is probably not a viable candidate for rapid expansion to replace fossil fuels. It's expensive, it takes a long time, and it's risky. Other alternatives are better, like solar and wind. They don't leave nuclear waste. You can deploy them rapidly. The technology is all ready to go. But they also have drawbacks. I mean, we have to be honest about this. Solar and wind are intermittent sources of energy. The sun doesn't always shine. The wind doesn't always blow. And even though sunlight and wind are renewable, the devices that we use to capture these sources of energy, the solar panels and the wind turbines, these are not renewable. They may be replaceable, but the steel, the silicon, the trace metals and minerals that we use to build these things, we're extracting them from the earth just like we are, with all the other raw materials that we use. And so it's a question of, can we make up for these drawbacks of this new technology? And the answer is yes, we can, up to a point, but these are still very different qualities and characteristics. To make up for intermittency, we're going to have to use some combination of three strategies. We're going to have to either change our energy demand so that it matches when the energy is available. Well, we don't like doing that. We like to, turn on the switch anytime we want the TV or the washing machine or whatever. We don't want to have to wait until the sun comes out to have to do that. Okay, so what's another way? Well, batteries or some other kind of energy storage. Fine, battery technologies are getting better, but that's an extra expense, not only a dollar or a monetary expense, but also an energy expense. So if you just look at the solar panel itself, it's getting cheaper all the time. So it looks like it's some of the cheapest energy around, but you have to look at it from a systemic standpoint. It's not just the solar panel that's needed. It's also the battery backup. And then, you may have to also provide source redundancy. That's the third strategy for dealing with intermittency. In other words, on a good sunny day, maybe, 10 solar panels would be enough to power your house. Okay. But what happens if it's cloudy? Well, 50 solar panels may not be enough to power your house. You may have to have a wind turbine someplace else that's operating and so on. So we will have to build more capacity than will actually be needed at any given time when sunlight and wind are available. So that means from a systemic standpoint, this is going to be a very expensive transition. A lot of people make the mistake of just looking at the price of the solar panel, but we're looking at energy systems. And the renewable energy system that's going to replace fossil fuels is going to be expensive. And if it's less expensive, it will be more unreliable. So the only way to make it more reliable is to make it more expensive. It can't be avoided.
So at one talk, you were also mentioning that it's a problem that we are going to make the new renewable sources of energy with the old fossil ones. So we are probably going to need to lower our basic consumption just for that. For that, even like for that limited time, we would need to limit our consumption. So it obviously wasn't done in that last 80 years, but there was like a lot of big increase of adding new renewable sources. So what's the trajectory there?
Well, right now the scale and the rate of deployment of solar and wind power is maybe between a tenth and a fifth the rate that would be needed in order to really make the energy transition at the pace that's required in order to meet the goals of IPCC, to keep the overall temperature within 2 degrees Celsius, much less 1.5. So first of all, we would need to be building lots more solar panels and wind turbines, but then there's all the rest of the infrastructure. Right now, we only use 20% of our energy in the form of electricity. The other 80% of the energy that we use is in the form of liquid and gaseous and solid fuels. We use that for transportation, agriculture, manufacturing, which is a big component. And so switching those areas requires not just building the solar panels and wind turbines, but replacing our transportation fleets, replacing a lot of agricultural equipment, and replacing a lot of manufacturing equipment with equipment that either runs on electricity, or the other way to do it is to use electricity to make synthetic fuels that will then operate the existing equipment. But to do that at scale will require building almost the equivalent of a new fossil fuel industry, because taking electricity to make synthetic fuels, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, combining with hydrogen that you've made using electricity, it's a very energy intensive process and a very energy inefficient process. It produces a very convenient output, which is, say, a liquid fuel that you can use in airliners or in manufacturing operations, high heat manufacturing operations. But it's very energy intensive and inefficient and requires a whole new load of infrastructure and equipment. So building all of this infrastructure means basically replacing a very high percentage of the infrastructure that already exists in industrial nations. And we're talking about doing that in the next 20 years. That's an enormous task, and it will require not just a lot of money, but an enormous amount of energy. And most of that energy, at least in the initial stages, will be coming from fossil fuels, because that's where 85% of our energy is coming from now. So that means if we try to produce all of this infrastructure over the next 20 years, in order to be able to maintain our current level of energy consumption or increase it, we will produce a huge pulse of carbon emissions. Now, of course, our intention over the longer term will be to lower carbon emissions, but over the short term, we'll be doing just the opposite. The only way around this conundrum is to reduce our overall energy usage, not only during the transition period, but also further into the future. That way, if we're using less energy for transportation and manufacturing and so on, then we don't have to build as much infrastructure now, and then we won't be using it later on either. That's not the end of the world. It's possible to live with a lot less energy than we currently use. We did it for for decades before and thousands of years before that. And people in many parts of the world are already using much less energy than people in Western Europe or North America are currently using. So if you want to find out what it's like to live with a tenth the energy that North Americans are using, well, just go to Costa Rica. And people are living perfectly happy lives, but they're using a lot less energy and their economy is much smaller. In effect, that's what we have to aim for, a smaller and happier economy. And the only way we're going to get there is if we work together and share what we have. And this means people at the top of the economic pyramid are going to have to sacrifice the most. Really rich people are going to have to be taxed really significantly in order to pay for all of this. And this gets back to the political agenda you were talking about earlier. Some people hear this and they think, oh, well, climate change is just a conspiracy to tax the middle class or the well-off people. Well, no, it's not a conspiracy, and it's certainly not for that purpose, but that's what we're going to have to do.
Come to think of it, it's actually really conservative, because you are trying to get back to to lesser energy consumption, so you can actually present it as a conservative value. Also, I just wanted to say because you were saying that the changes in infrastructure, I guess that on the individual basis or even on the state basis, it's mostly, for example, when we're talking about electric cars, that's just not enough, because first of all, it costs a lot of resources to create a car. The other problem is that it's too individual, because it's one person driving a car, so it doesn't really solve the problem there. It just moves it a bit. But for example, railway network, that would be something that would be like desirable? Because I just Googled it. Yes, Czech Republic has the biggest network density in the whole, like from all countries in the world. So, and most of it is electrified. So, you know, like we're already there, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, good, excellent. Certainly way ahead of the U.S. The U.S. has one of the worst public transportation systems in the world.
Actually, 5 times better. Our density is 5 times bigger.
Yeah.
Than US? Or...
Yep, than US.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, makes sense.
Okay. Good for you.
We're actually Czech Republic has the most, has the biggest density of small, how do you say it? Let's say small towns and villages. We have, I think, our population lives in the most, how do you say it, segmented, I don't know, agglomerations, or how do you say it? So we don't have wide spaces open between cities. We have lots of villages and small towns. So it makes quite sense that we have a dense infrastructure. So it's not quite fair. So
yeah, it's not fair, but we can still like use it to
we can
over Americans.
Yeah. Well, that's very, very good and very important, because the trend toward urbanization that we've seen especially over the last century has been built on fossil fuel transport. And as we move away from fossil fuels, transportation is going to be more problematic. Yes, you can have electric cars, you can have electric rail, but the way that we have used fossil fuels for centralized food production, agricultural production, is something that's not going to work nearly as well in a post-fossil fuel situation. So we're going to need to re-ruralize societies to a large extent. Big cities like New York and Los Angeles and London with, 5-10 million people, much less Tokyo and Beijing and so on. These are not going to be sustainable over the long term. We're going to have to move back into smaller cities and towns and villages supplied by local networks of food producers, much more like the early 19th century in that regard. Now, of course, we've learned a lot since the early 19th century about how to produce food more effectively and efficiently and ecologically. And we need to apply all of that knowledge. We can make life much easier and better and safer and healthier than was the case for our ancestors. But the way that we're living now in very dense, huge cities may not be sustainable over the long term.
But on the other hand, wouldn't I have like lower carbon footprint living in the big city, like traveling by bus or tram or any other subway, than someone who would live in the village traveling to, I don't know, like to school, to shop or something like that? That probably people in like dense cities should have lower carbon emissions, shouldn't they?
Yeah, that's true up to a point. As long as the overall society is designed with a centralized production, especially of food, but other stuff as well, and then transporting that stuff all over the place, then cities turn out to be very energy efficient under those circumstances. But then as you start to, reduce food miles, reduce the distance that you're transporting food and manufactured stuff, start making stuff closer to where it's going to be consumed and used, then it starts to make more sense from an energy perspective to live in smaller units.
Okay, I think we would have like 20 more questions or maybe more on this topic. I will start to just slowly turn it back to the Academia Film Olomouc Festival, which we should thank for basically making this interview real. Because you featured in a movie Once You Know, documentary, which is I think featured now on in the festival. How would you describe the movie and your role in it, and what's the idea behind it?
Well, the movie is really the journey of the director, Emmanuel Capellan. He's a man in his 30s who understands climate change and our other ecological challenges and has taken them very seriously. And he realizes that, once you do that, once you understand these things and do begin to take them seriously, you can't see things the same. Once you know these things, it changes your outlook on how you live your life and how you see the world, especially the human world. So he has documented his journey, and I was happy to be part of that journey. He had been informed by reading some of my books and so on. So he wanted to interview me and several other authors. So, we have conversations during the documentary in which we talk about the challenges of our living in a world where we have overshot environmental limits, a world in which the way we humans live is fundamentally unsustainable. The way we're living right now cannot be maintained into the future. If we do nothing, then we face societal collapse as a result of climate change and resource depletion. And if we do the right things in order to forestall that collapse, then that means we have to sacrifice a great deal and change a great deal about how we are living. So one way or the other, it's all going to change. And knowing that is quite something. It's a complete reorientation of how we think and how we feel about our lives and about the next generation. So that's what the movie's about.
Okay, but can you tell me how long can I keep put fingers in my ears and do la 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 before it impacts my life?
I would say it's already impacting your life in some ways. And,
okay.
and just over the next decade, it's going to be, we will see far, far more changes than we've seen so far. It's accelerating. So, it's one of these situations where it's an exponential change. It seems very slow at first, and then suddenly the graph becomes vertical.
In that case, what would you say that it's what's the best way for an individual to do something about it? Because the individual actions doesn't seem to be enough, because there's huge market forces and, for political forces. So what's the course of action that we should take as individuals?
Well, I think individual actions are important in the sense that we provide examples for each other. If the person who lives next door to you is growing a garden and keeping chickens and putting solar panels on their roof and ditching their car and using public transportation, well, that forces you to think, are they just crazy or are they onto something? So each of us can be an example to our friends and relatives and neighbors. That is important. But then we also have to speak up to public figures, to governments, and things like Extinction Rebellion, which are direct action efforts to raise our voices and tell our leaders that we take these things seriously and we insist that they do something. That's also very important.
It's really good, because in Czech Republic is considered to be pretty much United States in this, how they perceive things like climate change or or let's say any kind of social issues as well, with that direct opposition to it in any way, which like as you presented it, it seems that it will be really hard thing to sell, especially here. Like, I mean, like we have, I think I would say mostly accidentally, we managed to achieve few goals in this like long-term fight, but otherwise, like it's interestingly conservative in this way. Yeah, that will be fun.
Maybe,
yes.
Maybe one of the problems is that, as you said, it's different in each and every country based on their, I don't know, geography and history and energy consumption. So oftentimes it happens that this discussion is based on articles and news from different countries which do not reflect the energy needs of, for example, our country. So in our country, the biggest topic is nuclear power right now, because we don't have, let's say, optimal geography, or how do you say it, for many of the renewables.
Also, we have a long history of using coal, because like I'm from the coal region of the country. We have like several like huge deposits of like coal mostly, but also in the place where it's coal, there's also thermal energy, which is also fun, which could be used instead.
Yes.
But yeah,
Geothermal is very
geothermal. Yeah.
Do we talk about geothermal here? I don't even know if
we haven't. I happen to live in a part of the United States that has geothermal energy. And I live in Sonoma County, California, and a very large proportion of our electricity here in Sonoma County comes from geothermal. We're very fortunate in that regard. A lot of places, it's just can't be developed. So if you have it, use it.
Okay. We'll tell someone. We'll look how do we use it if we think about it. Okay. I don't know. Do we have more time, or are we just...
I think that this will be there's a lot of hard pills to swallow for a lot of people. I think like it might be better to end it here. I would like maybe if you have some kind of like positive message that you could give us, like what's like some success that we've already done or something.
Well, nature is resilient, and the human spirit is resilient. So, you know, if we take these challenges to heart and devote ourselves to them, we will find that we have resources in our communities, in our bonds of love and understanding with one another, that will enable us to make the kinds of sacrifices that are necessary and to get through this process. And once we do, we'll be able to look back and say, wow, we did that together. And our children will have something to be proud of us for.
That was very nice, but that's exactly the kind of thing that the people I know would totally not accept. And it's just like that's just like too optimistic bullshit. It doesn't make any sense. Like our president, for example, would say probably something like that.
If you want a pessimistic ending, I can give you that too.
Yeah, they wouldn't like that either, because that's a different kind of pessimistic ending that they like.
You know, the things should stay the same as they have always been.
Exactly.
That's one thing that's not going to happen.
No.
But honestly, like I have to admit, when I was listening to you basically the whole day today, and I like it's difficult to like admit to myself that I would need to change something in my life, because like my life is unsustainable, and the way how I'm living it, and also like just as you were talking about the problems with the infinite growth that our economy is based on. Well, my investments are based exactly on that. So just like taking this fact to my heart is kind of difficult, and I would rather just pretend that it's not true and just like keep investing in these things. It's like it will work. Like he's just lying. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Right.
It's like I really don't like it. What you're saying,
but thank you anyway.
Yeah, I like no like that's the problem. Like that's what I needed to learn in the past. It's just like accept the scientific explanations of these things and just like adjust my life accordingly and not the other way around. But even though that I'm trying to live by that, it's still very difficult. Like
it is
very
difficult.
very difficult.
You know, I go through exactly the same things myself. I've been living with this information for at least 30 years now.
Yeah.
And I still have the same dialogue in my head. You know, I still want things to, I have a very pleasant life. Yeah. And I would love for it just to continue the way it is. But I know it's going to change. So the rational part of me is saying, well, look, you need to prepare in this way and make these kinds of changes. And gradually I do them. And over the course of the last 30 years, you know, my wife and I have done all sorts of things to reduce our energy usage and make our living situation more resilient and sustainable. But there's still lots to do. And I still have as much denial as, well, I don't know if I can say as much as anyone, but I certainly still have those periods when I just want to say la la la, you know.
I guess the documentary is basically about this as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So people should watch it, and people should definitely listen to your talk. That it should be on the website, I guess. That's
sure. Online watch.cz. So people know there are links in the description, so you can see not just this documentary, more documentaries, and of course visit Academia Film Olomouc for more. And you will have also Mr. Heinberg will have a presentation, I think, in a few days, so people can see it as well. So thank you very much for your time and for the nice discussion. And let's think about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to all of the folks who are listening, and good luck to us all.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Bye.